There we are. And as with many other ITSM FUK events, the slides and video will be shared with other members in the event recording section in our members area. One very small commercial, if you're planning to join us at ITSM 25, our annual conference in Milton Keynes in November, you have just 2 weeks left to take advantage of summer sizzler discounts. So the weather may no longer be sizzling, but the discounts still are. Do get in there and book your place. So that's enough from me to start us off. Over to Mark, who's a popular speaker and an internationally known governance, risk and compliance expert. Thanks very much, Mark. And you're still on mute.
How about that? You can probably hear me now. Excellent. And I was about to say good morning to everybody. I think it's afternoon for everybody out there. I'm sitting on the west coast of the USA. I'm sitting in Phoenix, Arizona, in the middle of the desert, where right now it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, but no worries. Kind of used to getting up early doing these kinds of things. So don't worry at all. We're going to get through this. We're talking about rewriting the playbook right now. Now, I want to be very clear about something real quick. I am not an AI expert. I do not claim to be an AI expert. But what I am is a governance expert who understands a little bit about AI. So I wanted to share a little bit of knowledge and insights into what we're seeing right now around the globe as it comes to service management. And I want to bring a couple of really interesting things in here. I want to talk about governance first. Obviously, not a very exciting topic for everybody, but I'm going to really jump into what we're seeing from a governance perspective, agentic AI. And one of my favorite topics at the end, which I think really is the true outcome of what we're trying to do, and we're trying to build trust. And I think trust, especially digital trust, I'm going to share a little bit of information with you about some of the frameworks and some of the information we're seeing coming out right now on the idea of digital trust. Now, AI it's making faster and smarter decisions when it comes to, say, service management, right? In some cases, somebody says, wow, this is doing better than some of even our best service management folks, but you can't explain how AI did it, right? You can't explain how it happened when trust breaks down. We're going to talk about that obviously in just a few minutes. That's why I truly believe that the future of ITSM right now, it isn't just about efficiency, right? It's about governance. It's about how we look at this idea called trust, because you can do all these great things and people trust you, but it takes one bad thing and all of a sudden nobody trusts you, right? So ITSM frameworks, obviously, these have been out for quite some time, right? They've always been about control. They've been about reliability. They brought order, right, through discipline processes, looking at our services, and they gave us confidence. They gave us confidence that our services would be stable, our services would be dependable for the consumer organizations that are using those. But I'll tell you that agentic AI right now, this is disrupting this whole foundation. Many of you are seeing it right now in your very workplaces. Instead of following simple workflows, AI begins making independent, goal-driven decisions. And that shift is challenging this balance between what we call governance and autonomy. And while this efficiency and this faster response, have been really successful for us, they can no longer be the only measure that we have right now. That's why I truly believe that the future of IT service management is rooted in trust and governance. And that's why we're trying to rewrite the playbook a little bit here in just the next several slides. Now, we've talked about how agentic AI disrupts this ITSM. But what I want to do is I want to wrap a lot of these things together and bring them up into a single presentation for us. Of course, we're going to start with ITSM, our foundation. Presumably, most folks here on this call understand the basic concepts of ITSM. But I'm going to add to this idea of agentic AI. Now we add this, that's bringing power, it's bringing disruption, right? Automation that no longer just follows rules, but it makes its own decisions. I want to link that then, obviously, makes sense. And we move to this idea called governance. This is a critical piece for us, right? Without governance, AI can create chaos. And many people are seeing this right now. Governance is providing this idea of the oversight or the guardrails. I'll talk about guardrails in the next couple of slides. And of course, accountability so we can make decisions. And then finally, we're going to add that to this idea or this outcome that I like to call digital trust. Because remember, your customers you can deliver your services correctly, right? You can pass your audits, you can be secured, you can protect privacy. But if your customers, your consumers of your services don't trust you, none of that matters. They're going to pack their bags and they're going to walk away. So we're going to bring those pieces in there. And this is my famous quote. You probably hear me say this several times, right? You can protect privacy. You can be secured. You can pass your audits. You can meet your service level agreements. They don't trust you. They're going to move on and they're going to go to somebody else or find another way to get those services. So I'm getting really bad feedback out there, folks. I'm not sure if we got everybody on mute, but I'm getting really, really loud feedback on my end. Hopefully it's not me, but I'll keep moving on. All right. So
Yeah,
let's do
do go on mute, please. I'll check
okay.
that everybody's on mute for you, Mark.
Very cool. Thanks. All right. So let's jump into these a little bit. Of course, we're not going to be on ITSM too long because I want to jump into the AI and then on the governance side. So if you think about this whole idea of ITSM, this evolution, I liken it to, say, transportation. You know, back in the 90s, we were just building the roads, the frameworks that brought order to chaotic IT operation. We move into the 2000s, right? We added traffic lights. These are the rules of the road, their process governance around, say, incident management, problem management, change management, the things that kept us moving smoothly. We move into the 2010s. We saw fast vehicles. We saw highways arrive. We have automation, right? Those would be the cloud reshaping the delivery, but we still are rooted in process. Then we hit in the 20s, right? We added GPS and smart navigation. That gave ITSM predictive insights. Now, with agentic AI, we're entering the era of self-driving cars. So think about it. We've gone from just building a basic structure to now we're in self-driving cars. I'm not sure if you've ever been in a self-driving car, but it certainly questions your trust. We have them here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I will tell you that the first time I drove in what's called a Waymo here, it really made me question whether or not I trusted the technology. Because here's the deal. When we're talking about trust here, you can trust an organization, but you may not trust the technology that's sitting between you and that organization. So the idea of this whole movement that we're seeing in ITSM is it isn't about just humans managing systems. It's about humans governing those autonomous systems. Now, in the world of ITM, we are in self-driving cars, but humans are still required. So let's move into this idea of agentic AI, right? This is the artificial intelligence systems that not only analyze and recommend actions, but also they have autonomy. So think about like hiring a driver, okay? Traditional automation is like giving them strict directions. Turn left here, stop here, follow this route, okay? Traditional AI is like having a co-pilot who spots traffic, right? Suggests shortcuts, but you still steer the car. With that agentic AI, however, it's like the car and the destination. It's letting it do itself. It makes the turns. It avoids obstacles. It's adjusting the route with a degree of autonomy. And I'm going to use that analogy throughout this entire presentation because I think it's interesting now that we are in this whole world of driverless cars when it comes to ITSM. So when we talk about agentic AI, right? AI helps to see it in the context of how we've evolved. Right? We had automation in the past. Right? It was all about scripted, repeatable tasks, predictable, rule-based, right? Think of batch job that automatically backs up servers every night at, say, 2 a.m., right? Nothing smart, just following a script, right? Then we moved on to this whole idea of traditional AI, right? That traditional AI goes a little bit further, does say pattern recognition, looks at recommendations still, relies on humans to act. An example here might be IT monitoring tool, right? Might predict a disk failure and alerts a tech, right? But the actual replacement action is still up to the human. But now what we're emerging to is this agentic AI. It takes it to the next step, right? It doesn't just predict, it acts. These systems can make these autonomous decisions. They can continuously learn, and they're pursuing goals, right? Imagine an AI that detects the same disk is about to fail. And instead of just alerting a technician, it spins up a replacement in a virtual cloud, in the cloud environment. right, in a VM. It may reroute workloads, informs the team afterwards, right? So that's one of the things we have to make sure that we're looking at from a governance perspective, which is obviously what I want to hit here in just a couple seconds for us. But why does this all matter, right? When it comes to this whole idea of agentic AI and service management, we can't look at opportunities and risks just in isolation, right? We have to balance these things out. So, of course, we have opportunities on the left. These are positive outcomes. I am adopting agentic AI. What is that doing for me? It's giving me a lot of stuff you see there, right? Efficiency, faster incident resolution, reduced downtime, all the way down to scalability, right? Where we may have AI-driven service management that grows with demand, right? We need to make sure we're balancing that, obviously, with some of our risks on the right-hand side, right? And we have to have a balance, because if we have too much of one and not the other, right, we're going to be imbalanced, and we might not be able to deliver our services correctly. So we do have to take some risk, but under the negative side, accountability, right? With agentic AI helping us with ITSM, maybe opaque decisions may have unclear ownership of outcomes. Who owns an outcome that an AI, that AI or agentic AI, right, made that decision? Obviously, trust is a big one to me, but it gets all the way down to service quality, that efficiency that we might have for that. So, kind of considering all these opportunities and risks, I kind of love how we bring this last piece down here that underscores each one of those. AI's promise is speed, fast responses, reduced friction, hopefully, right? Quicker resolutions, seamless service delivery, but speed alone is a double-edged sword, right? Because if AI makes the wrong decision or operates without proper trust and accountability, those mistakes don't just happen once. They scale instantly across the entire organization. That's why governance is not a constraint, right? It is there to set up the right guardrails for us. So take, say, service requests, for example. All right. And AI might be able to instantly approve hundreds of access requests in minutes, which looks great on paper. But even if one of those approvals violates compliance or bypasses, say, a segregation of duties rule, that risk is multiplied hundreds of times at machine speed. So now we're seeing this grow exponentially. So let's jump in a little bit and take a look at why this really is mattering for, say, us here in ITM. Now, remember, agentic AI doesn't just speed things up, right? It changes how ITSM works. To understand this impact, let's look at a couple of examples here. So first, let's take incident management. There's a positive example here. Again, just very, very high level, right? Agentic AI can triage incidents before analysts even log in. Critical issues get escalated immediately. We reduce downtime. We free staff from, say, low-value noise. An example here might be, say, a network outage alert, right? It's instantly flagged, routed to the on-call engineer before hundreds of duplicate tickets even arrive. Next example here, it's a positive example. Let's change management, or some people call it change control, right? AI elevates risk. It pre-approves low-impact changes. It cuts these CAB bottlenecks out. It keeps agility high. It reserves human oversight for those high-risk decisions we might have. An example here might be, say, a patch to update antivirus definitions is auto-approved, while a database scheme change still has to go through the CAB, okay? Well, let's look at a couple potential negative examples here, right? Knowledge management. Oh, that's a positive. Sorry, I have three positive and three negative. So one more positive here. AI can auto-generate knowledge articles for me, right? From resolved incidents or, say, resolved problems. It keeps the knowledge base fresh. It boosts self-service. It reduces repeat tickets. Example here might be after resolving a VPN connectivity issue, right? AI creates a step-by-step article that helps users fix it themselves the next time, right? So there's some positive things. A couple of negative examples, right? So from problem management perspective, I mentioned this a second ago, AI may prematurely declare root causes, right? And it sends this, it's sending teams chasing phantom problems because it's already declared these root causes. The result here, wasted time, right? And declining trust in the whole accuracy of this. An example here might be AI clusters server alerts and declares a memory leak, but the real root cause is a faulty network switch, but we're chasing other things that AI presumed was the actual root cause. A couple more here, service requests. Here's a negative example, right? Unchecked. We mentioned this here just a few minutes ago, right? Unchecked, AI might auto approve access requests without any context, right? Bypasses compliance, it bypasses safeguards, and it raises serious audit and security risk for me. An example here is granting a contractor, right? Full database access because it recognizes a pattern but misses that the contract actually expired yesterday. Finally, we have one more, and then we'll move on here. Configuration management. Negative example here. I've actually seen this happen in a client organization. An autonomous CMDB update sounds efficient, but errors can creep into this thing without this oversight, right? CMDB loses integrity, governance, visibility suffers. An example here, AI automatically records a temporary test server as a permanent server, right? Skews my asset counts and my whole compliance reports. So you see, there's a lot of examples here on agentic AI and some of the things in basically foundational IT service management types of contexts we might want to take a look at here. All right. So now I'm going to jump in a little bit. Obviously, again, not an AI expert, but finally, before I move on, I just gave some examples there of some positive and negative examples of how agentic AI can affect us from a process perspective, and obviously could affect our services at some point after that. But here's just an example of a short list. Think about it. The scenarios that we just went through, you could have the similar types of scenarios for each one of these areas across the service management spectrum, particularly around my processes. All right. Okay, now comes one of my favorite parts. Let's talk governance. Have you ever heard this one before? Hey, stay away from governance, right? If you can, it only slows you down. Hear it all the time, right? In fact, especially my teams when I was a CIO, when we were pushing down the path of obviously faster IT, like more agile approaches, and then when we were moving into the DevOps world, my fast IT folks would always say governance just slows us down, but it wasn't really designed to slow you down. Governance is a framework that is supposed to give you levels of authority and give you freedom to make decisions and freedom to move forward as long as certain attributes are met. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Okay. So staying in line with the whole metaphor I used earlier about traffic, right? So let's take traffic, for example, right? What would happen if there were no governance over driving, right? What would happen, right? Traffic rules are different everywhere, right? We have governance over driving. We have speed limits, road signs, right? There are rules that say, here's how you are going to actually behave when you're driving a vehicle, right? Now, here's what's interesting. Governance is different for different places, right? Traffic rules, speed limits are different when you're driving down the center of a city. The speed limits are different when you're driving on an open highway in the middle of nowhere, right? The governance framework, which is speed limit, still exists, but we've changed the speed limit. Folks, I want you to keep in your head as you're listening to a lot of the great presentations we have right after mine. And we're talking about agentic AI. We're talking about the technical pieces. We may even talk about controls. Remember, the core foundations of governance have not changed. What we're doing is changing some of those speed limits. We're changing information about passing rules. We're changing information about lane protocol and so on. That's the whole idea, because let's face it, if we did not have any governance over driving, here's what it would look like, right? Nobody would follow the rules. Now, actually, if you travel a lot, you've probably been to a place like this where you sat in one of these. Now, in these cases, right, with this chaos, right, the rules exist, but the culture said, well, rules are for the other drivers, not just me. So that's one of the things I think is important from a governance perspective, because I think what's happening is a lot of organizations right now are saying, hey, make sure you govern yourself. We throw this term governance behind everything and expect governance to kind of magically appear, right? We have corporate governance, risk governance, IT governance, service management governance, right? AI governance, you name it. We throw this term governance out there and expect you to govern yourselves. Folks, you can't govern yourself, right? If you ask me to govern myself, what you've just asked me to do are these three things. Number one, You've asked me to make up my own rules, make up my own speed limits, make up my own passing rules. You've asked me to determine which of those rules that I chose, right? You've asked me to choose which of those rules I want to follow, right? I'm governing myself. I make up the rules and I can choose which ones I want to follow. And if you ask me to govern myself, the third thing is you're asking me to determine the consequences for those rules of mine that I choose to break. You can't govern yourself. Wherever you are in an organization, even though we're moving into this whole idea of AI, by the way, don't freak out, right? Because AI is actually larger in magnitude, but think about all the disruptions that we've had that everybody goes back to it and says, we need governance. We need governance. We did it when we did client server. I remember that years ago, right? Then we go to cloud services. We need governance, right? Now we're in AI. Well, what's going to be next? It's going to be something like quantum computing. So the idea of your governance frameworks really haven't changed. So when we talk about that whole idea of these guardrails that we have, right? I want to make sure that I'm applying the right speed limit to the right place that you're driving. So think of governance like say baking a cake, right? You can't just throw random ingredients in there together and hope it turns out. Right? You need flour for substance. You need sugar for balance. You need eggs to bind it. You need baking powder, and so on. Right? So there are certain ingredients that I think we have for a governance system that we might have. So what you're looking at right here, what we call the governance components, they work the same way as ingredients do when you're baking a cake, right? Whether it's processes, organizational structures, principles, right? Whatever, right? By themselves, each one of these elements or these ingredients, they don't deliver the full outcome, but collectively, these are the guardrails that keep autonomy from turning into chaos. What you're looking at right here, if anybody here is familiar with the framework called COBIT, formerly known as Control Objectives for Information and Technology, COBIT identifies what we call governance components. I liken them to those ingredients. Okay, now this is very important because remember I told you your governance system shouldn't be changing because we're in AI. But what should be changing are the speed limits, the passing rules under each one of these areas. So let's take a look just very quick, right? We've got processes. Most people understand processes, inputs and outputs. You have your typical processes. We talked about a few of these earlier: incident, change, problem, release, deploy, risk management, right? Those kinds of things. We have to have those processes. Well, next we have organizational structures, right? These are things not just org charts, but there are things like levels of authority, delegations of authority, escalation procedures. Think about it. Levels of authority and escalation procedures will be different for many different types of situations, whether we're in a DevOps situation or whether we're training our AI model, right, to be able to give us the information that's valuable for us in order to deliver our services. Next, we might have information flows and items. Where is the information coming from and where is it going? What are the artifacts we need? What is the level of protection and availability for each one of the phases along that life cycle? And of course, part of our governance framework, right? People, skills, and competencies. I truly believe this is one of the weakest links most of us have, right? And it's not just about people's time, right? It's about that knowledge, that talent, those skills. And do we have the right skills in order to move forward? Of course, principles, policies, procedures, kind of focusing on the policies piece. When people think governance, they think it's just a whole bunch of policies. Hey, we can loosen those policies up. Remember, change the speed limit. We are now in a time where having these very, very strict speed limits are no longer helping us because, if we're so overly secured, if we're so overly controlled, that's going to tip that balance. And that means if we're so secured, so compliant, it's going to cause us to suffer when it comes to delivering our services. Next, we have our culture, ethics, and behavior. Of course, we say it, leadership starts at the top, but you can't change culture overnight. And again, when we talk culture, there are some organizations that say, the rules are just there as suggestions, right? But there are other organizations that if you violate a rule, that's a compliance violation, right? How do you see that culturally? Are you a organization that takes risks or doesn't take risks? And then finally, services, our infrastructure applications. How is this affecting our services that are delivered to our customers and our consumers, right? Not only internally, but maybe externally as well. And what's the infrastructure applications and the tools we need to be able to manage those? So moving on a little bit, kind of want to talk about those guardrails because I think it's important for us that we understand. Don't change your components. Change the speed limits within those components, which takes me to this thing called digital trust. I like this a lot. This actually comes from a framework that was created by ISACA. It's called the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework. I was trying to draw with my pen and it's not letting me. It's going ahead. So apparently I'm not going to be able to put any ink. There we go. DTEF is what it's called. I'm particularly comfortable with this definition. I was one of the core architects of the DTEF framework. But when we were putting together the definition of digital trust, this definition you're looking at right here took us 3 days. Right? Imagine having a room of global professionals who all think they're experts in their field to all agree on one definition. Right? That was 3 days. But I want to point out a couple things because the World Economic Forum has a pretty good definition. I still think this one's better, especially for the subject we're talking about here. What is digital trust? It's confidence. Confidence in the integrity. Look at this of the relationships, and it says interactions and transactions amongst providers and consumers. Here's what's important. It's very generic when it talks about providers and consumers, right? This could be between us as an IT service provider and our consumers, our users, our customers within the organization. Or it could be the trust relationship between an organization or a company or association that's providing some type of service or product to the public, right? Or the consumers. So we've been very, very open about that. But here's what's interesting, right? Of course, our people, organizations, process, and information basically to maintain that digital trustworthy world. That's important for us. Okay. So I'm going to use this as a basis of how we kind of move on and talk a little bit about trust for us and then how we can start looking at trust and agentic AI and kind of bring governance into the mix. Remember this old game we used to play where you'd blindfold yourself and say, I trust you, catch me? Well, I would tell you this, about 100% of the time, nobody could catch me. I always fell down somehow. Something went wrong. So as a consumer of digital services or products that are enabled by digital services, this is not how you trust. Right? You should not be putting a blindfold on saying, trust me, or I trust you, catch me. Okay. That's one of our first things here. But I like this next slide here, shows a couple videos of actual trust. So you take a look at this, folks, on the left, right? She trusts those guys. And look what happened. She got hurt. Well, let's compare that to the one on the right. Not only does that guy get hurt when he trusted them, but the folks he was supposed to trust got hurt too. Notice they banged their heads right in the middle. That's the whole idea here. So when we're talking about trust, we talk about the consumer side, but on the service provider side, trust me, folks, this is not how you should be looking at digital trust, right? We should not be putting our heads in the sand right now, because if we don't look at these use cases, if we don't look at the positive and the negative risks of using agentic AI, our whole ITSM playbook is going to look like that group of cars that were all piled up in an intersection because we did not modify the speed limits and the rules within our control framework or our governance framework. Okay. All right. So let's take that a little bit further. What kind of score would you give yourself here? Let's say we're talking digital trust. You are using agentic AI. You've got a governance system in place. But how would you actually grade yourself, right? When we talk about digital trust, it helps really to kind of think about something that we're all familiar with, right? School report card. I used A, B, C, D, F, primarily North American, USA, but I think everybody kind of understands the idea here, right? Just like students are graded from A to F, right? Based on their performance. Organizations can also be graded on how well they build, sustain trust in this digital space, right? So an A, utmost confidence. With an F, you may have some serious gaps or serious issues. What are we talking about here? Well, it's an A. Well, you've got a strong, established trust, right? You are an A player. You're a leader when it comes to trust. You're using AI correctly. No negative issues are coming out of this. You move down to a B, right? Reliability, you're improving down to a C. You're still at a passing score, but there's a little bit of caution around whether or not I trust you as a service provider. A D, technically speaking, still passing, but guess what? I don't really trust you. There's high risk and it's been eroded. And then finally, fail. All right. I absolutely do not trust either this service provider or the technology that sits between it. So I think that's kind of an important view for us when we look at that piece. So let's take this and let's kind of figure out what we're talking about here. What grade would you give your organization today as a service provider? How well are you trusted? Do your users trust you? Do your customers trust you? Right? Do the consumers outside of your organization, right? Do those consumers actually trust your organization? Where would you give yourself a score? Because I will tell you this: if you told me today, if you said, "Hey, Mark, we are at A right here," oops, at A up on the top, it only takes one to move you from an A to a D immediately. Think about what's happened to, say, Facebook and Meta. Years they were in the A's and B's, and then bam, they hit the D's and F's. They're slowly coming back up, but you can't just give yourself a grade and have that grade for the next 12 months because it could change tomorrow. Look at those AI-enabled scenarios when it comes to ITSM that can help you gain or lose that trust. Remember, we said earlier that we have some great presentations and some great discussions coming up with Jason, Matt, and Sam to be able to talk about some of those scenarios. And I want you to start picking up information and data from those and say, what are some of those scenarios that could happen to me and what do we need to prepare for? And then finally, what's that event, right, that could trigger a massive change to your digital trust grade or your score? It could be a positive thing that happens. Most of the time, we love to focus on the negative stuff, though, right? This happens. Oh, I don't trust them anymore. But it may not be an event. Remember, I could trust you as an organization, but I may not trust the technology sitting between us. I might trust the coffee shop that I go to, but I certainly do not trust the free Wi-Fi that they have available, right? I may trust the company that owns the driverless cars, but I may not trust the technology of that. So those are some things to kind of think about, because remember, as we're putting together these AI-based or these agentic AI scenarios, what are the positive and negative things that could affect this? Because remember, you can protect privacy, you can be secured, you can pass your audits, and you can meet your service level agreements. But if your customer doesn't trust you, they're going to find another way to receive those services. Now, you can't go out online and buy a tool and plug some information in this tool and say, hey, tell us if we're trusted or not. That doesn't exist today. And like these folks here, well, they have this thing called a trust-o-meter. They calibrated it, but it doesn't even trust them. Doesn't exist. This is why governance is key for us, having those guardrails that we talked about. But remember, in some parts of the organization, the speed limits and the passing rules have to change. Because if they don't, we're going to continue to say, hey, don't do that governance stuff. It's just going to hold you back. So kind of wrapping up the last few slides here, of course, the future of ITSM, it's trust, right? At its core, ITSM is about confidence, right? Confidence that incidents are resolved properly, changes are safe, services are reliable, right? And that's where agentic AI takes a very, very big role for us. And digital trust now becomes a deciding factor for us. The whole future of ITSM isn't just about delivering services, it's about trust. So proper governance over agentic AI helps us ensure that we can make our strong decisions rather than weak decisions. We can build our confidence in how these pieces come together. So what are all those elements that come together? I'm not going to go through each one of these, right? But think about each one of these areas. We have to be strong in all areas. If we mess up, if we have an error, if we have an oops in one of these areas, it could have an effect. And each one of these areas could be affected by a negative event that's caused by an AI agent that makes an incorrect or an unsavvy answer to a question, and it leads us down the wrong direction. So those are kind of great to think about. So that's a lot of stuff we have to think about here. But of course, having proper governance in place is really the deciding factor that helps us here. And that outcome, obviously, that we talked about was that idea of digital trust. So in all those scenarios, of course, that's going to be my overall business outcome for us. Okay. All right. So close up here. I've got a couple of tips and tricks I want to share with you. Of course, remember, we didn't jump into the depths of AI. That's not what I do for you. What I'm trying to do is put some order to some of the decisions, some of the use cases, some of the examples that you might be looking at when it comes to deploying AI agents, right? That make autonomous decisions. Don't go into this blind. So I've got 6 very high level, pretty basic suggestions I want you to remember as you're rewriting your ITSM playbook in this whole agentic AI area. Okay. One is what I want you to do is replace rigid process control with guardrails, right? Rigid process control says it has to meet this control. Now we're looking at more control objectives. Change the speed limits. My apologies for saying that over and over, but I want that to stick in your head. Your governance system, your governance components do not change. We still have processes, we still have policies, right? Those things. But now we need to change this. And our old playbooks, right, that emphasize these escalation paths, strict approvals in the AI area, the focus shifts to transparency, accountability, and ensuring that AI is operating within our trusted boundaries. Okay. Next, what I want you to do is empower AI to act, right? It's not a negative thing here, right? But anchor it with explainability, and it must have human override, right? Let it handle triage, let it handle diagnosis and resolution, but ensure that the decisions have audit trails, right? They can be explained, and a human can stop it or reverse it through intervention. Next, what I want you to do is retire old static process maps, right? Adopt living workflows. Our workflows are changing, right? We used to put things on these Visio charts, and that's the way it was for the next 3 years, folks. You know, these are changing now daily. Okay, right? If compliance rules change, and we all know compliance rules change for us quarterly, if not more often, right? AI can change instantly, adapting, say, change management approvals, right? Processes become very dynamic as opposed to this old-fashioned thinking of set and forget and review it once a year, okay? Also, what I want you to do is shift, right? I want you to shift IT staff from process executors to AI supervisors. Remember, humans can't go away, right? We said we have to have the ability to intervene. We move upstream. We're overseeing AI behaviors, right? We're auditing ethics. We're handling exceptions instead of just closing tickets. And of course, we have to do a fair amount of training and education in order to be able to do that. Next, what I want you to do is enable multi-agent collaboration now across IT, across your security, across your DevOps, and across your business. Now, not only do we have a single AI agent making decisions, they are now collaborating with each other, right? This is awesome. Imagine an incident agent working with a monitoring agent and a knowledge agent to solve issues faster. It's like this swarming concept, but they're agents doing that for us. ITSM becomes part of this larger digital trust ecosystem for us. And then finally, what I want you to do is make digital trust the currency of IT service management success, right? Traditional SLAs, with a lot of discussion around SLAs, XLAs, so on. I'm going to stick to the good old fashioned SLA here, right? We measured uptime. We measured availability, right? We measure performance. New playbooks also measure trust. That trust being things like transparency, fairness, user confidence, reduced friction, right? Without trust, speed and efficiency don't even matter. So kind of finally on this, if IT service management does not evolve from managing processes to governing trust agents, AI will rewrite this playbook for us. Let's stay ahead of the curve and rewrite this before AI does this. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that went pretty quick and I pounded a lot of information at you. But like I said before, I'm not an AI expert. But what I'm seeing right now are some things that we need to now do to rewrite that playbook. Don't forget, governance components have not changed just because we're in AI. It's how we identify the speed limits, how we identify the lane passing rules, right? And the behaviors once we get in that vehicle. Because when you're in the open road, the speed limits are totally different than they are when you're driving down the center of a main street in a town. That is what we need to do. We're not reinventing anything out there, although we're just changing those speed limits out there. So I think I'm open here for a couple questions. I'm going to take a look out of chat. It looks like are there any suggestions on how to better represent and visualize living workflows? I tell you, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do on that question, because we may have some information come up between Jason, Matt, and Sam. I'm not assuming that, but I think we might be able to address that one as a group, if you don't mind, towards the end when we go into kind of the Q&A session at the end. So I'm not avoiding your question, but I'd like to shelve that until we put the three of us together. Okay. So how do we deal with exaggerated negative trust? So there are people who are negative about AI from the start. Yeah. So here's what's interesting, right? For all the positive things AI is doing for us, right? There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of examples around the world of positive things AI and specifically agentic AI are doing for us. But it only takes that one negative thing to happen, right? It only takes us two negative. That's all you hear about, right? Just the negative things. Here in Arizona, and I will talk to you about what my suggestion is. Here in Arizona, of course, I told you we do a lot of driverless cars. And what's interesting is, the number of successful engagements between these Waymo vehicles and being able to deliver a customer to their site from a positive perspective. They're safe. They make it where they need to go on time, right? All the metrics are positive. Performance indicators are positive. Okay. Thousands of these trips are positive. Then you have one where a car gets in an accident. Here's what's funny is the percentage of these AI led vehicles that get in accidents versus accidents driven by human beings, completely different, right? Human beings are causing more accidents than driverless cars are, but you only hear about one driverless car and then everybody thinks, oh my gosh, they're all dangerous, right? The positive aspects of this are what you focus on. And I will be honest, going back to your question, how do you deal with the negativity? All right. Go back with positivity. I understand, right? That's one event. We're working towards making that better. But I will tell you that keep focusing on the positive aspects of what these are doing for us, right? They're either saving us cost, saving us time. And honestly, this sounds so weird. I never thought I'd say this. I truly believe that driving a driverless AI run car is safer than me riding in a car that my mother is driving. It's safer. It literally is safer. I never thought I'd ever say that in my life. Well, until if you've ever ridden in the car with my mom, you'll understand what I'm saying. But that's the whole idea. Focus on the positive sides of this, and people will start seeing that the AI is not going anywhere. So one more question here, and I think I've got to jump off just in a second. Embark on an AI journey. How do you start the digital trust conversation? Outcomes. Start with my comment. We can protect privacy. We can be secured. We can meet our SLAs. We can pass our audits. But if our customers don't trust us, they're still going to find another way to receive those services. They might be walking on us. That is your starting point right there. Digital trust isn't some new thing, right? It's a business metric, right? So I think that's kind of a key thing for us. And of course, I'll be around through the rest of this, and hopefully we can kind of put together some of the thoughts around governance around digital trust with some of the AI expertise that's getting ready to talk to you all next. Mark, I think that's
fantastic. Thank you very much, Mark. Some great applause there and well deserved. I mean, that was the perfect way to set the scene for this topic. And yeah, it is all about trust management. And thank you. Thanks very much indeed for that. A few other questions popping up in the chat, but yeah, we'll keep those for the for the discussion at the end so that we can stay on course.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much indeed.